On the topic of responsive design, when it comes to spacing and text sizing, you're of course already familiar with pixel-based values. So consider this, we have some dummy text here with a handful of headings for the example. So if I were to open up a style tag, we could try something like an H1 has a font size of 40 pixels, and let's just do this down to level 4. These are mostly arbitrary. A heading 3 maybe is 28, and a heading 4 is 22. Okay, so if I come back and give this a refresh, this is what we currently get. And everything seems fine. You're happy with this. However, once you start tweaking for mobile, you take a look. This is in an iPhone 7 or something like that. And you start noticing, well, at this size, these headings are way too large. So what do we do here? And usually your first inclination is a media query. So you might say something like media, screen, and if the maximum width, we're not doing mobile first here, but that's okay. Maybe we're targeting mobile. So if the maximum width is about 767, well, then we are going to reset these. This is what a lot of people would do, and I would recommend against it. But nonetheless, you do some calculations. I'm not even sure what they should be here. Once again, this is entirely arbitrary. We're not doing any necessary division. How about 22, 20, 19, or 18? You know, whatever the math would work out there. And sure enough, if you come back and give it a refresh, you fixed the error. So now for desktop, you have these nice headings, but as you come down to a mobile size, we decrease those headings. And this is what people will often do. But you know what? I bet you'll find it's way more tricky than that, because littered throughout your code base, especially if you're not using utility-based CSS, you're going to have countless headings where you have once again hard-coded or tweaked the sizing, and you keep having to add these media queries. So instead, we're going to use a new unit type. Rather than pixels, we will use rems. All right, so what is that? What does that refer to? Rem refers to root m. So it's a way of specifying a size of an element based upon the size of the root element. And the root element is going to be your HTML tag. So take a look at this. Right here, let's say the HTML will have a font size of 16 pixels. This is generally what just about all browsers will default to out of the box. However, now let's add another media query, and we'll say, well, if the maximum width is 767, then we're going to tweak this. So now it's going to be 12 pixels for a mobile device. Okay, let's come back and see the difference. So if I give it a refresh, we get the same thing. But as I decrease it, you'll notice that everything that hasn't been hard-coded, in this case the paragraphs, will adjust accordingly. Nothing strange here, right? That would make perfect sense. We specified for mobile devices, the font size should be 12 pixels. So that's exactly what this paragraph text will be. But as you increase it, we can bump it up. All right, now let's make the headings conform to this root font size. But the tricky part is, let's say you have these values already, but now how do we switch over to using rems? What is the formula? And this is one huge benefit to using pixel-based values. If you are given a design in Photoshop, well, it will already be defined in pixels. So it's very, very simple. So here's the basic formula. Take the value you already have, divide it by the root pixel value, and that will give you your rem value. So for example, right here, we would say 40 divided by 16. All right, we get 2.5 rems. That is the formula. So again, from pixels to rems, you take the current size, you divide it by the root element size, whatever you have defined for HTML, and that will give you your rems. Now, if you want to go in reverse, of course, you would say, well, if you had 2.5 rems and you're trying to figure out, well, how many pixels is that? You would just do the opposite. This times that should equal that. So 2.5 times 16 will give us 40. And now you have your pixel value. Or if you really hate math, there's of course converters all over the web. Okay, so let's do this together. We're going to use the top formula. We already know this is 2.5 rems. All right, next. 35 divided by 16 is 2.187. All right, 28 divided by 16 is 1.75. And finally, 22 divided by 16 is 1.375. Okay. So now let's come back, expand this, I'll give it a refresh, and notice nothing changed at all, which means those calculations were correct. But now, as I bring it down to a mobile layout, think about it. This will then take effect, which means these values will instantly reflect the new font size. Take a look. Notice how big this is. As we decrease it, there we go. The headings are now adjusting for your mobile layout, which means you can make this as dynamic as you want. So maybe you'll add another one for, something like a tablet. In that case, maybe you'll bring it down to 14 pixels. So let's bring this guy down here. Okay, so now you have a base of 16 pixels. If the maximum width is around a tablet, something like that, we'll bring it down just a touch, and then all of the values specified using rems will adjust to match. And then when we bring it down to mobile, we'll do it one more time. All right, refresh. We're going to bring it down. It will adjust one time and then another time. Think about how much we'd prefer this versus what we had before, where we had constant media queries where we kept updating these sizes. Or what will often happen, if you don't know about this, is using something like Tailwind, you'll end up doing stuff like this. So real quick, we'll say, let's do text 3XL. All right. So everything's going to reset here because, of course, I've gotten rid of all of the spacing. We'll talk about that in a minute. But yes, we have a font size of 3XL, and as I decrease that, nothing happens because we haven't updated that value. So what people will often do is they'll say, okay, well, maybe we'll do large by default, but then once they get to a large screen, around 990 pixels, something like that, then we will bump it up. Okay, so now for mobile, it's smaller, but as we increase it, that picks up right there. And now you have a larger font size. And this is what people will do. They think, well, this is what I need to do to keep it as dynamic as possible. But yeah, this would be horrible if you had to do it. And think of the number of places where you would have to tweak sizing. Instead, we're going to use rems. And because we're using Tailwind, they embrace that out of the box. So take a look. If we do text sizes, there we go. Notice all of your text sizes already use rems. And they show you, as a convenience, the pixel-based companions. And once again, if you want to practice your formula, well, the base font size is 16. So we can say 16, in this case, times 1.25 gives us 20. And what do you know? That's the exact value there. But anyways, if all of your text sizing is using rems, that means for mobile layouts, when you want to tweak the sizing, you don't do stuff like this. You instead keep it like you had before and then tweak your root base font size. So let's go to app.scss where we are using Tailwind. I will boot up our watcher. And then, let's just do it anywhere right around here. So we'll say, once again, the default font size is 16 pixels. I like to hard code this, even though you can almost always rely on that being the default. Anyways, let's think. If we want 12 to be the base for mobile, well, why don't we set that as a default and then set up a screen for, let's just switch to large at that point. And there, we can set a font size to a base of 16 pixels. All right, so does that make sense? Oh, and by the way, if you want, you can even inline this up here. If you don't want to repeat yourself, yeah, that would be fine as well, whatever you want. So if we come back and give this a refresh, once again, we get the same thing. If we take a look at the font size of the HTML tag, because the minimum width is 992, that takes precedence. But as I decrease this, or let's switch to mobile, now we have a font size of 12. And I want you to notice the headings once again are adjusting. So bring it back. You have these large headings. Let's see the computed font size for the H2, about 24 pixels. On a mobile device, this H2 drops down to 18 pixels. That is the benefit to using root ems over pixel-based values. Okay, so now a quick note here. When we switched to Tailwind, we lost all of our margins. And I think this can often be counterintuitive, at least initially, because you think, well, I probably want some spacing there. I think what you might find, though, for most layout design is you don't want that. And if you add it by default, you're constantly removing that margin bottom. So instead, for basic text like this, what I will often do is apply a class. And we talked about this an episode or two ago. Something like content or generic content. And then there, within your style sheet, we'll just do it here. There, you could target everything. So you could even say every direct child should have a margin bottom of 1em. And that way you get some initial spacing out of the box. So here is our main section, and they all get the padding. And then if you ever need to override anything, here, margin bottom 8, whatever you need there, you can override as needed. And of course, this would go within your app.scss file before your utilities so that they can override things. And then of course, notice all of the text is up here against the edge. Let's talk about this, even though it's not connected to rems. While we're here, let's wrap everything within a container and then center it on the page by setting the left and right margins to auto. So let's add that. Come back, refresh. Now we've centered it. But then when we bring it back down to mobile, you end up with this thing again, where the text is once again up against the edges. So as we discussed, this is why it's useful to take every section of your site and wrap it in something called section. Whether that's a div with the class, you can use the section element itself, whatever you want there. In this case, I would get all of that and wrap it within a section there and bring it back. Okay, so now think about it. You could add a class of section, and now you have a place to say, whenever I apply this class, I need to make sure that I have a padding left of about 20 pixels and a padding right of about 20 pixels. So if you come back and refresh, now you always have that spacing even for mobile. And of course, you can expand it and you get what you would normally expect. But yeah, this is an important thing. Anytime you have a new section that's not already within a container or something like that, yeah, you might want to follow this convention of wrapping it within a section. All right, so that'll do it for this lesson. You learned about root M sizing, or rems. Now with Tailwind, this will of course apply to your text sizes, but even your margins. So you'll notice those two are defined using rems, which means everything is going to be based upon the font size of your HTML element. And if I were to change that, like let's get crazy and set the font size to 50 pixels, everything will adjust. It looks horrible, of course, but everything will adjust as needed to match that new font size.